All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Pastor Chat. I don't know if that's actually our official title or if that is just still a TBD situation. But as you can see, this is different. We are not in the official Pastor Chat studios. We are each in our own offices, it looks like. So we have today a little bit different crew as well. I am Pastor James again here at Bethesda, but who else do we have around the circle or square?
Hi, I'm Pastor Jordan from First Macon.
Pastor Reggie from First Macon.
Kate. And Pastor Kate from Faith Lutheran in Isle.
Excellent. Glad to have all of you here. We are trying it through Zoom, so we hope it will work. But we figured this way we can model our social distancing better while also still bringing you the same insightful commentary and theological reflection and bishop upsetting discussion as before. No, just kidding.
Today.
No, we don't have Mike here with us today, so we should all be safe. No, we missed Mike and Becca today, but obviously as Holy Week is coming up very soon, we are all getting very busy. But today we are talking about Palm Sunday. You can see my palms in the background. This coming Sunday is Palm Sunday, and so we have some readings for Palm Sunday. Does someone want to note those readings, what they are? Yeah. Well, yeah, and so as we mentioned briefly at the beginning, I'm going to be using a little bit of a mix. I think I'm trying to remember what all the readings I sent to Kate recently, but I did the processional from Mark, and then I think are we using the Philippians? I think as well.
Yep.
Yep, and the Philippians from. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, but the gospel reading then is they use in the narrative lectionary is from Mark, but it's from Jesus being anointed at Bethany by, in the Mark text, an unnamed woman. So we don't need to dive into that too much today, but I'm going to focus on that actually in my sermon because just, this text about this sort of person who pours out this love for Jesus. And one of the great aspects of that gospel reading is, Jesus says, okay, remember what this woman did. This is something we should, this act she has done should be remembered for all time. And Mark doesn't even get her name, which is really funny. Well, maybe not funny. I guess it shows the sexism perhaps of that time a little bit. Remember this woman, Jesus tells him, and great job.
What's her name? So-and-so.
Yeah, whatever. I forget now. But I'm thinking, but especially I think what I'm going to focus on is, again, all these unnamed servants right now that are going out there.
Hence the hymn of the day.
Hymn of the day, all the faithful women. But certainly, yeah, but even just all the folks right now that are kind of modeling this Christ-like love, which is, I think when you think of that main processional reading and tying back to that is, of course, Jesus comes as a different kind of king. Which I'll let others talk about, but.
Well, one definite connection I can see with you say like all the faithful women, and the bridge that we have between that story, the accounts of the cross, and the accounts of the resurrection is the women. That's one of those places I've often highlighted in Bible studies that I think that the patriarchal church has kind of wiped women out of the gospel stories, but they're still there in between the lines, and that's one of the strong places where all the men keep on betraying and denying and running away. The women are the ones who are always there, and they never leave Jesus. They're there at the cross, they're there at his burial, and they're there at his resurrection. They're always there. the men can't be trusted, but the women are always there.
Do you have a specific elaborations on that, Kate, about untrustworthy men? No.
Well, finally someone says it. No, well, I get that question all the time, or like, well, why are you a pastor? You're a woman. But the first missionary was a woman. I mean, it was Mary who met Jesus outside the tomb, and she was the one who proclaimed Jesus is risen. So there's a lot of power in that. I'm looking forward to the sermon.
So maybe really, given the text, Kate, you should be the one preaching it.
No, I like to hear men kind of lift women up.
Okay, that's good. That's true. Yeah, it's not just an issue for women, right? You know, it's something for all of us. But,
Right.
Just a few weeks ago was John 4, the woman at the well, and she also acts as that apostle, I guess, like the giving of the message and sharing of the good news of Jesus. Like, she goes and converts her whole village. Like, she's the one who brings it. Jesus doesn't go into the village; it's her who brings the message of the Messiah. Another tie back, yes, but not in today's text.
You know, Philippians is one of those letters from Paul that I don't know, always doesn't get the respect it deserves. I think Philippians is really strong. People kind of, you know, that you read through Romans and some of the others, but there's some of this beautiful imagery in Philippians.
Does it strike any of you that one of the most essential theological points for Lutheran theology, this idea of the emptying himself, is a quotation from a hymn? And Paul is quoting an early Christian hymn in his theological writing, and to me that's a real reinforcement of the power of hymnody in the church.
Even that early, like around Paul's time, yeah.
Yeah, the hymn was written before the books of the New Testament, and they were already working out the theology of who Christ was before Paul even started to put it down on paper.
Yeah.
Well, I think Paul too. I mean, Paul is always fairly clever in how he is able to adapt his message and draw from different sources. You know, to connect with people as best as he is able. And so, yeah, I love that idea of him like thinking, oh, hey, there's this great hymn out there. Why do I need to reinvent the wheel? I'll just sort of elaborate on that. Because again, you know, you see that in a number of cases with Paul, of whether Christian or even Jewish or not, you know, these other sources where he's drawing from and riffing off it a little bit. So that is kind of a cool idea to think about that there's this existing hymn that he's just like, hey, this thing that you guys are all listening to, pay attention to that.
Well, something we do as, you know, modern day preachers too, that we don't connect back to Paul very often, is using something modern and building off of it. We're always trying to use what's going on in the world and seeing Christ there too, I guess.
But I do like to use as illustrations from time to time popular songs or old hymns or poems, things like that speak to people in different ways and not just, you know, scripture texts and straightforward stuff, but looking at it from different angles. I've talked quite a bit in my teachings about the cross, this idea of him emptying himself. I've always been really moved by the aspect of the cross, that Christ at any time could have called down angels, could have and ended the whole thing, called down an army of angels and just wiped out everybody who was torturing him. But every step of the way, he chose this. He emptied himself of his power to stop this, and chose this. Why did he choose it? He chose it for our sake.
Perhaps another interesting thing to wrestle with, especially, you know, as we're thinking of people that might be listening to this, I think, you know, too, you always have to be careful, and Paul especially, I think that is one of the aspects of him that is a little bit more challenging, is when he pushes to this length of, right, of the slave or of the servant image. And I'm especially thinking, again, of all these people right now that are going above and beyond serving, and you know, the doctors and the nurses and people working at the grocery store, and putting themselves in harm's way, and very much, you know, that balancing act. Okay, yes, be a sacrificial servant like Jesus, empty yourself completely, but okay, where do you manage self-care in that balance as well, too? Pastors as well, right? We're kind of, this has not been a chill time for us. We are definitely been called upon.
I just work 1 day a week.
Yes, exactly. Kate's just sitting back munching Cheetos in her office, you know, and
I have a coach.
yeah. But I mean, how do you guys balance that out, especially when you, whether with Paul or with other places in the Bible too, of yes, we are called to be a servant, but where do you draw that distinction between how much someone serves? Or
Well, I've been doing these Pastor Kate checking in videos on Facebook every single day, and one of the topics just a few days ago was self-care, and I reminded people that Jesus needed to take a rest himself, and
Often.
I mean, I think that's good permission for us to do the same, because I feel like, especially in this time where we're quarantined or social distancing, like we feel like we have to compensate for the time that we are that we're at our house or just staying put. We have to do something. We can't just rest. And another topic was being still. So if Jesus did it and Jesus needed it, I think I can do that too.
Yeah.
He took a long walk in the wilderness and rested.
And he was cranky when people like interrupted him on occasion too.
Right.
Yeah.
Remember, he wouldn't let a storm interrupt his nap.
Yeah. He had his earbuds in and was listening to a podcast, and yeah.
I remind myself quite a bit of that old saying that we have a savior and you're not it. And so I shouldn't expect myself to die on the cross of working all the time. I'm not being a good servant by burying myself in work. Self-care is important.
Yeah, you know, and I think too, just as we're looking, you know, some of these other pastors that have gotten even in trouble with the law too, right, of trying to keep the churches open and haven't been practicing social distancing, and there's almost like this fatalistic mindset of you get sick, and like I don't know if Jesus would be fully on board with that. As much as it's about emptying yourself, you know, again, as you've all been saying, you know, you have to look at the bigger picture as well, and how do you serve best sometimes?
I'm thinking the emptying yourself is about emptying yourself of pride and ego more than anything.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, it's in verse 8, he humbled himself. Like, when do you just realize it's okay not to have a church service? Like, it's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be about you. Like, it's about God. God's everywhere.
Amen.
So is there anything from the Passion reading that you guys think should be brought out? I know it's a huge text. You could talk about a dozen different things, but
only like 4 chapters of the Bible.
Yeah. Is there anything that's from that's speaking to you in particular right now?
I saw a statistic. I've used it in a message that 1/3 of the Gospels is about the Passion. So we probably could do a whole separate video on that subject.
Yeah, I guess I'm seeing different styles of leadership as I'm looking through all these. Like, we have Pilate being the governor, Roman governor, and how he leads versus Jesus being a leader, servant leader, on kind of what they do. Like, I guess Pilate just kind of bends his own will, or he doesn't stick to his own will or what he wants. He knows Jesus is innocent, and yet he just listens to the crowd. And Jesus knows he's innocent, but sticks to his own. I guess he could just, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, Pilate's a weak reed, and Jesus is strong. Like, Jesus has his own path that he sets before himself, that even though he could change, but Pilate doesn't stand up for anything, even though he knows it's right or wrong. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Is that the direction you're going with your sermon?
We're not preaching at all. We're doing a
We're not.
dramatic reading of
Oh, okay.
the whole Passion. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, we have divided into 3 parts. There's Jesus, there's a narrator, and then the congregation are those who we actually will have with us in the sanctuary this Sunday. We'll do all of the other speaking parts besides Pilate, and so all of those difficult lines that kind of hit you in the heart when you read them. They're the congregation and all those at home are saying those out loud. So not just crucify him, but even all the "I do not know him" lines and "surely not I" kind of lines, you know.
One thing I like that you had said earlier, Jordan, too, is just that figure of Pilate. I know I've given sermons on him in the past, you know, and gone in that direction. Because of course, sometimes there's this whole debate. It's like, how much blame does Pilate get, right? Is it the religious leadership? Is it Pilate? You know, Pilate's the one who gets the line in the creed, right? You know, but like, do you like, is he the main villain? Is it the people? Obviously, sometimes these passion readings have been used in sort of anti-Jewish ways in the past. But I think in some ways, to me, Pilate, I think what he demonstrates so well is just the kind of evil or the kind of suffering that happens just out of apathy. Yeah. Right. Like he's not a sympathetic figure. You know, he may not be the big, you know, mustache twirling villain, you know, really having it out for Jesus, but it's sort of his apathy of not really caring that I think is almost as damning, you know. And you think of like the Holocaust or other horrible, evil things that happen throughout history and happen into the present of people just, you know, the big pharma companies, right, with the whole opioid epidemic of like, well, yeah, we're seeing our country tear itself apart with all this stuff, but we just wash my hands of that. We're making money, you know. Of people removing themselves from responsibility of a lot of someone else's suffering, which I think really hits home to me a lot of the time.
You didn't even see why the religious leaders want to kill him. Like, he's a direct threat to their power. I don't know, but he's not really going after, I mean, Pilate's power per se. He never like says, "I'm going to supplant you." I'm not. Or, I don't know. He never really goes after Rome at all either, as far as I can recall. Is Jesus ever actually say anything negative about Rome?
Or even the defensive.
He's accused of it.
Yeah,
he's accused of it, but I can't recall. But anyway, yeah.
But even kind of the defense of Pilate too, sometimes where it's like, well, Pilate seems to kind of understand or really be wrestling with what's going on. Well, that's great.
Yeah, but he
still doesn't care. Yeah. He doesn't get. It's like, oh, whatever. It's like, well, yeah, he's starting to get through to me, this guy, but whatever. Go whip him, you know. Like,
I just always thought of him as a coward more than washing his hands of the whole thing. Like, oh well, it's not my fault anymore, or not my problem. So,
yeah.
Can I ask a question about another character?
Sure.
It seems from how it talks about Judas that his role in this was known from the beginning. That this was kind of part of God's plan. Um, what do you make of that? That, you know, we're not predeterminists. That God's pulling the strings and making everything happen, but the idea that Jesus knew from the beginning what Judas was going to do, and he did it. Like, this was destined. How do you feel about that?
Does that make him more of a sympathetic character because he couldn't help his actions? I mean, it wasn't his doing. I mean, it was really God's doing then.
Yeah, I've had some really good discussions with like my men's group too. I know we read something, I don't know, right around when I started here, and we were talking about some of the disciples, and when we got to Judas, yeah, just those questions of when you do have a God who is beyond the concept of time, that really kind of messes with your idea of guilt and innocence a little bit, and foreknowledge and all the rest. But yeah, it's a tricky one.
I mean, personally, I guess I've taken all of that language and just talked about it, that that foreknowledge is not the same as predetermining. So that God knew what Judas was going to do. Jesus knew what Judas was going to do, but didn't determine that didn't plan it to go that way. Just as all difficult circumstances in life, our God uses them for God's plan. God doesn't determine them. Still, it sucks to be Judas.
Well, and I think even too, I mean, when you think of Judas or the chief priests, I mean, obviously there is the sort of, again, the villain role a little bit that's sort of lined out for them. And yet, you know, I think there is a little bit of room there to wonder, to try to see it through their perspective and see that at least amongst some of them, you'd think they'd be still making a mistake, but making a more honest mistake of, again, right, that you think of the passage of Judas concerned about some of the finances, and obviously some of the gospels are more clear of like, well, that's because he's a thief. But not all of them point that out.
I think the gospel writers are not in agreement in how they feel about Judas.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with the chief priests, right? For some of them, they could legitimately think this man is being blasphemous, right? Claiming he's a son of God. And that obviously comes from not believing that in Jesus when he says that. But I mean, you know, that's a pretty amazing thing that the Messiah came after thousands of years of history. And so as much as, you know, you're not excusing them for that lack of belief, you can understand a little bit why they might be coming to that sort of a position of, and this person could be threatening us with the Romans and upsetting the balance, and you could possibly see Judas coming from like almost like a broken hearted, like he believed in this guy, and now, you know, it's, you know, for this reason and that reason, he didn't quite make that leap to fully kind of getting on board with Jesus. And yeah, I don't know.
So what I'm hearing from you is like the priests who are doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, or, you know, they think that they thought it was the right reasons because Jesus was a blasphemer. Judas is a case where, as a zealot, he expected Jesus to be, as everybody did with messiahs, that he would be this new king that would come in and bring in the new kingdom. And when he didn't do that, then he, like, the story I've heard is that he is trying to push Jesus to do it, to do what Judas expects him to do. So if he forces his hand and gets him in trouble with the authorities, then surely Jesus will finally do what he's supposed to do.
Is it? I always like, okay, so if God foreknew but did not determine that Judas would betray him, like, by picking him to be a disciple, aren't you like kind of saying, well, yeah, I'm gonna make this happen. Like, I don't know, like isn't that determining? Like, he could have not picked him as a disciple. He could have picked someone else who would not have betrayed him in that way, and then the cross would have happened. But did the cross need to happen? Like, it did happen.
I've been asked in Bible studies that question. If Jesus picked him because he knew that his actions would lead to the cross, then how can Judas's sin be unforgivable?
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think too, also just when you're thinking in terms of, okay, what does that teach us reading it now? I think we can also imagine just the scenario that in any time someone is preaching something difficult, you're going to get those who are really invested in it, and yet at some point there is going to be that breaking point, that it's almost inevitable, right? That you preach something difficult, at some point you're not going to make someone happy, even if they've been with you like up to that stage. It's gonna happen. It's just the nature of human beings and the way they respond to challenging situations, and so I think there is that lesson in Judas that we can have that person that, and it can be us sometimes too, where, man, we are really waving the flag for someone, and this is my hero, this is my perfect person, and then all of a sudden they do something that like breaks your trust in that person, even if they didn't really do anything necessarily fairly to do that, but all of a sudden the perfection or the view that you held them gets a little bit shattered, and there can be that fall for people of it just happens, and I think that is the danger, and I think mindful of that in ourselves as well.
I'm reading something. I have the text here in front of me. I'm reading something that strikes me as interesting. Judas is at the table with Jesus at the Last Supper, and Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and they all say, "Surely not I, Rabbi." Jesus says, woe to the one who, by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for him not to be born. But then Jesus goes ahead and breaks the bread and drinks the cup with the disciples, and Judas is still there. And it strikes me that Jesus gives his body and blood to Judas. It almost says, even this thing that you're going to do, I know you're going to do it. You know you're going to do it. It's the worst thing possible. Woe to you. Woe to the one who does this to the Son of Man. I'm still giving you communion. There's something powerful about that to me.
Yeah. Throughout, like, it seems like every conversation I've ever had about Judas, he's always the exception to the rule of every theology that exists. I don't know, like, we don't say predetermined, but he was pretty predetermined. Like, and is he forgivable? Is he not? Like, I don't know. He's just kind of the oddball of the Bible. How do we deal with this? How does God deal with him? And we'll never know. At least here.
Yeah, and yet, to go back to, I think, maybe what you said earlier, Jordan, or someone said, he's not the only disciple that betrays him in a sense, right?
Yeah.
He's not the only one that, or no, maybe it was Reggie, right, that said that it's the women that showed up, right? All of the disciples, all the male disciples failed on that part. And all of them seemed at least a little bit nervous when Jesus kind of mentions that around the table. Like, wait, let me check back. Was that me? I don't think it's going to be me. But and so I think that too is something perhaps to keep in mind, that maybe they aren't the main betrayer in the story, but certainly they're each in their own way.
Sure. Is abandoning Jesus, is denying Jesus a worse sin than betraying Jesus? Is there such a thing as one sin being worse than another?
Not according to our theology.
Except for not following copyright law on
Dun,
live
dun,
stream.
dun. Pastor Chad. Pastor Chad.
Well, that's the Bible discussion for this week. We will see you in another video soon. Thanks.